This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Jamal.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, the catastrophic situation in Gaza continues unabated. As we speak today, over 26,000 Palestinians have been murdered, and that's close to 12,000 children who've been murdered in the genocide that Israel is committing in Gaza right now. Close to 68,000 Palestinians have been injured. 90% of the homes and buildings in the northern part of Gaza have been absolutely destroyed. Palestinians living in Gaza right now, primarily living in tents or outside. The weather conditions are terrible. It's cold, it's rainy. There are infectious diseases that are running rampant right now for Palestinians who are living outside and in these close quarters. And the military campaign, despite the ICJ ruling, continues at a very intense, rapid rate. So, Jamal, we have a big show to go over today. We have a lot of topics, including hearing about the ICJ ruling. We're going to hear about the suspension of aid to UNRWA, which supplies the, food supplies to Palestinians in Gaza, which is being cut. We're going to continue to talk about the Israeli really bizarre, illegal idea of resettling Israeli settlements back into Gaza at a time when this genocide is occurring. And we're going to talk about some of the political implications with Joe Biden basically saying, who cares about Arab American voters? But probably the most important thing for you and I to talk about, Jamal, it appears that Nancy Pelosi believes that pro-Palestine activists are taking money from Vladimir Putin just to be pro-Palestinian. One of the most bizarre things that Nancy Pelosi has ever said. So we have a big show today.
Totally bizarre by Nancy Pelosi, and we'll talk about this. But let's start with the ICJ ruling. Just a brief summary for those who haven't been following all the details, and we won't go into all the details, but basically the court ordered Israel to refrain from any acts that could fall under the Genocide Convention and to ensure its troops commit no genocidal acts in Gaza, which is very, very, very important. Okay, now a lot of people are complaining. They're saying the ruling basically did not call for a ceasefire, but this was not the purpose for the ruling. Just for a lot of people don't know that wasn't the purpose for the ruling. The ruling required Israel to prevent and punish any public incitements, which we've been seeing day in, day out, to commit genocide against Palestinians in Gaza and to preserve evidence. That's very important, related to any allegations of genocide. I mean, to preserve evidence. And what happened just within the past few hours, Israel has erased an entire cemetery, people who got killed near hospitals there. And of course, which is another thing that Israel is violating, which is to take all measures to improve the humanitarian situation for Palestinian civilians in the enclave. And it's very important to mention that this was a supermajority ruling, with 15 out of 17 judges voted in favor. One of the judges is Israeli, just to mention that, basically imposing the so-called provisional measures, including the court's president's Joanne Donahue, who is from the United States. The only judge that voted against everything in those rulings is Judge Julia Sebunitide of Uganda, who was the only one to vote against all 6 measures adopted by the court. Mind you, Israel's ad hoc judge, Aaron Barak, voted against 4 measures. So she has outdone him.
But we should know that the Ugandan government issued a statement 2 days ago saying that the voting of the Ugandan judge is not consistent with how the Ugandan government sees the situation. So even the government of Uganda distanced itself from its own judge in the ICJ. Rather interestingly.
So what happens now, basically, just is Israel is required to submit a report to the court on the steps it has taken to comply with the orders within 1 month of the ruling. And then the court will examine in detail the merits of the case. A process could take years. So, I mean, and of course...
But it's important, Jamal, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's important. I mean, the kind of big picture also is that the court found that the South African case had cause for it to further investigate the possibility that Israel is committing genocide. They could have just looked at all the evidence and stopped it completely and said that there was no evidence. So even though they didn't demand a ceasefire by Israel, they did find that there was compelling evidence to support the South African case, that the possibility of genocide was real, and they allowed the case to go forward. And as you rightly say, now Israel has to basically show the evidence that it's complying by 30 days. And given the way things have been going since the ruling, Jamal, Israel is just ramping up the aggression against Palestinian civilians in Gaza. They have no intention whatsoever to stop this genocide.
Yeah, and this is what Israel and the United States and others who support Israel wanted for the ICJ to basically throw the case out of court and say, we don't have any evidence. It's very important also to talk about the Genocide Convention, because this is all based on the Genocide Convention, Jess, which is the 1948 Genocide Convention, ironically, same year of the Nakba, but basically enacted in the wake of the mass murder of Jews during the Holocaust by the Nazis. And it defines genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy, which we've seen Israel doing, the destruction, in whole or part, or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And Israel has been destroying Gaza, killing Gazans by the hundreds, about 200 people are getting killed on an average
every day. Every day.
And acts of genocide include the killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group in whole part. So starvation, which we're seeing, preventing aid, including its soldiers going to the Rafah border and preventing trucks from entering into Gaza. Bombing convoys, bombing people who Israel tells them to go to safe areas so they can be sheltered and fed, and they kill them on their way there. And now this game, and this is our next topic, Jess, is and the timing of it, just because now they've waited, all of a sudden now they are vilifying UNRWA and cutting aid, led by the United States, sadly,
and UK,
which basically, and the UK, which suspended aid to UNRWA, the only source and the only really NGO that's basically handles feeding, housing, schooling, delivering medicine, medical supplies, and so forth. And unfortunately, 9 other countries followed suit. So you have about 10 countries, few refused, like Spain, I know, has refused to do so, and some other countries. But then you have Canada and Australia and the UK basically stopping or suspending aid to UNRWA.
But isn't that complicity, Jamal? In my mind, that's complicity in the Genocide Convention, because basically what we have are the United States and some EU countries who are colluding with Israel to basically starve Palestinians to death. Because as you mentioned, UNRWA is the primary agency that provides basic humanitarian food needs to the 2.3 million Palestinians living in Gaza. And not only is that being cut, but the Israeli military, as you pointed out, continues to limit and preclude even limited supplies from coming in. The amount of starvation that's going on in Gaza right now, Jamal, is unlike anything we're seeing anywhere else in the world. There's not even in sub-Saharan Africa is it this bad right now. So the United States, UK, and these other European countries, including Germany, which seems to have nostalgia for genocide, Jamal, but we'll get to that a little bit later, is acting to further extend this genocide by denying and precluding food, basic food, from getting in to Gaza right now. It's really kind of a global participation in this genocide against Palestinians.
Well, there's no question that the Biden administration suspension is a drastic and morally corrupt and indefensible step, Jess. The U.S. is one of the chief donors. They donate. Actually, the United States started UNRWA. It was the first kind of seed money to start UNRWA. Let me tell you something. I'm registered at UNRWA because I was born after the Nakba, so my entire family, my birth certificate has an UNRWA stamp on it, declaring that I am a refugee. And you have millions of Palestinians who are registered by UNRWA. And of course, many of the Palestinians were able to pull themselves out of the kind of the UNRWA aid that Palestinians needed right after the Nakba in 1948, except for the people in Gaza and in the refugee camps in Lebanon and other refugee camps that are spread basically around Palestine, historic Palestine. So in Gaza now, and we're talking about even before this whole suspension, it's kind of like the timing they waited to see what the court's going to decide, the ICJ, about the genocide, and then they hit them with this charge right after that, 24 hours after the decision, basically to distract from what the ICJ and from the victory that South Africa has achieved in bringing Israel, which justifiably so, to face the court and to have someone monitoring basically its genocide and its atrocities. So they come up and they say, oh, I don't know, 10 to 12 people may have, because even when the State Department was asked about, and again I say, these are allegations, they remain allegations. When they were asked, you know what the State Department spokesperson said? And I'm paraphrasing here. He said, we have not investigated yet. So they're taking the word of Israel, very honest and believable country. And they said, that you have 10 to 12 people who participated. UNRWA itself, which I fault also, fired those 10 people without an investigation. Israel mentions 12. But let's assume that there were. UNRWA employs more than 1,200 people, responsible for basically feeding 1.8 million people out of the 2.8 million residents of Gaza. So here we go again with the collective punishment, Jess.
Exactly.
10 people, you punish an entire population. 1.8 million people suffer now because of the decision. And I want to say another point on this. Israel, the Israeli military, which we know is committing or is being investigated for committing genocide. We know it has been implicated in the murder of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. We know that its settlers have basically torched the family of the Dawabsha family, basically set their house on fire and killed their children, and many other atrocities. And many of these settlers and kahanists serve in the Israeli military. And they've been bragging about it and posting videos. They're incriminating themselves. They're posting videos destroying hospitals and schools, and they're humiliating Palestinian civilians, having them march naked and do all kinds of criminal acts and war crimes. Did the United States and these countries ever consider to basically cut aid on Israel? Military aid. I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about military aid, as Jamal, they know that they are committing war crimes.
Jamal, just the opposite has happened. Just the opposite has happened. In fact, as we have, reported on this show, I don't know how many hundreds of times, but since the genocide in Gaza has happened, if anything, the United States, specifically Joe Biden and the State Department with Anthony Blinken, has increased the amount of support and military supplies that are going to an army, the Israeli army, that is engaged in what South Africa and the rest of the world believes is genocide. So there's no punishment, Jamal. In fact, the only thing that we see coming from the United States and from the UK is a reward is a reward to support this genocidal activity. And I feel like we need to talk about Germany here, Jamal. I really do, just for a little bit, because, people are saying, well, why is Germany, coming out in such support of Israel right now? Is it like German guilt for their participation in the Holocaust? I don't think it's German guilt, Jamal. You know what I think it is? I think it's German nostalgia for genocide. It seems like the German government has a nostalgia and a longing to participate in yet another genocide, just like they did, during World War II. And I think it's disgusting what the United States is doing, supplying a country that is engaging in this genocide, and seeing countries like the UK and Germany and other NATO and European countries, supporting this genocide, even with the South African application to the ICJ. They will all be held accountable, Jamal, because we understand that there are some other countries now that are going to bring perhaps the United States and the UK to the ICJ or to the ICC as complicit in the genocide that's going on in Gaza right now. So the legal battle is not over by any stretch of the imagination.
And mentioning Germany, let's not forget about the genocide in Africa, Namibia. That's another major genocide that they were reminded by the way.
That's why I think they're nostalgic for genocide. I really do.
Well, if the standard for cutting aid were a possible connection to war crimes, which they should be, then the U.S. would have cut Israel off a long time ago, but it didn't.
It increased it.
And
it's
clearly is not the case. That's not the standards. This is the double standard that we have. The Biden's administration is guided in this conflict not by the consistent principle of war crimes, etc., but the strategic interest. That's what they keep presenting to you. And millions of Palestinians are paying the price. And the settlers, the Kahanists, the murderers of Shireen Abu Akleh, the murderers of the Dawabsha family, and the daily murder and attacks on Palestinians, whether in Jerusalem or in the West Bank, just basically the United States looks the other way and pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah, but Jamal, let me just say, and you've heard me say this a million times, the United States keeps saying that it's in their strategic interest to support basically the war crimes that Israel is committing. It's in their strategic interest. But is it really? In the last 24 hours, drone strike in Jordan killed 3 American soldiers and wounded probably 30 more. The Houthis are basically clogging up and basically delaying shipments and trade in the Red Sea. You have Hezbollah in the on the border with Lebanon that is destabilizing the region too. You see what's happening in Iraq and in Syria. It seems like the United States' idea of a strategic interest to support Israel is falling apart. That argument doesn't make any sense because the support of Israel, if anything, is making the world more unsafe, more unstable. And we see the entire region in the Middle East and North Africa actually being more unstable and not in the United States' best interest. So that whole argument about strategic interests does not make any sense and does not line up with the reality of what's happening in the region right now.
No, and many politicians and military leaders spoke about this. It's never been in the interest of the United States. Every single conflict that the United States has been involved in had something to do with Israel, including the Iraq war, including what happens now in Syria. And I should correct the record a little bit here, and I have some information. I'll share it later on. But the attack didn't happen in Jordan. It happened in Syria. Happened in Syria on the border. They say that in Jordan because they say in Jordan because then the United States has a lot of explaining to do to say why these soldiers. We opened the can of worms to talk about how basically 1/3 of Syria is occupied by the United States.
Right.
And this is the area where ISIS operates. And somehow ISIS doesn't attack now American interests, and they don't attack anybody but the Syrian government,
Right.
And so it's a long topic that needs to be discussed once I get all the information correct about it. But basically, that's a whole different topic. And now it's basically a way to implicate Iran, because they say these came from Iraq and Iran supports this. But we're back again to Iran. I'm back again that Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu from day one egging the United States to drag the United States into a war with Iran. That's the whole purpose. Anything that happens, all these attacks on U.S. interests in the Middle East, they're going to pin the tail on Iran and drag the United States, and hopefully...
Well, that's what the Israelis want, Jamal.
That's what they want. That's what Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't care. He can set the whole region on fire. The hostages can go, the Israeli hostages can die, they get killed, it doesn't matter. More Israelis die, doesn't matter. Getting into a regional war doesn't matter, as long as he keeps his seat and he keeps himself out of Israeli jail, basically. And that's what we're witnessing. But anyway, I want to talk about these Israeli politicians, Jess.
Okay,
and that's again...
because I have some news about those Israeli politicians, but please go ahead first.
Because part of the clause of the ICJ is asking to stop incitement to genocide. So now, instead of doing so, these Israeli politicians are doubling down on the idea of transferring the population of Gaza. They come up with crazy ideas, from sending them to Africa, to sending them to the Sinai Desert, to building an island, to building a fake island in the Mediterranean, to put them in it. And Netanyahu, of course, is now encouraging these settlers to talk about, even though in front of the United States is rejecting it. He's saying, no, we don't want to have any establishing new Jewish settlements in Gaza, but we don't want to see the Palestinians in control in Gaza. I want to control the land. And he says that's where everybody getting upset about, from the river to the sea. He said, basically, Israel must be in control of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
That's right, Jamal. And I think our listeners and viewers should know that 2 days ago, there was a big conference in Jerusalem. And who attended this conference in Jerusalem? Cabinet ministers and the extremist illegal Israeli settlement movement. And their main topic is to resettle. Think about this. Resettle. They called it a celebration. And if you read the article in Haaretz, Jamal, they talked about it. The settlers talked about it as a moment of hope and happiness during a time of gloom in Israel right now, because they're excited about the idea of reestablishing Gush Katif, for example, which was one of the most grotesque settlements in the middle of Gaza.
Actually, the leader of the settlement, Hebron, who used to be in Gush Katif, that's the one you're talking about. He went there to celebrate and said, I'm returning home.
I'm going to go back to Gush Katif. I'm going to go back home. And this is happening at a time when a genocide is occurring, Jamal.
And you have another, I forgot her name, this woman who I say she's a Hitler reincarnated, and these are heavy words, but I forgot her name. I'll talk about it later on, but she's basically talking about total
annihilation
of Palestinians there.
Yeah.
Of course, her father is an American, is from the United States, and her mother is from Poland. But nevertheless, she wants to see all Palestinians gone, and that's what she said. Then you have, of course, the far-right National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who said that we must promote a solution to encourage the immigration of the residents of Gaza. They try to put it in nice words, encourage, like I encourage the immigrations, like getting rid of them. And then the far-right Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who also holds a position in the Defense Ministry, said that Israel will rule there in Gaza, meaning, and in order to rule there securely for a long time, we must have civilian presence. So they want to resettle. So
that's settlements, Jamal. When they say civilian presence, that's the code word for illegal Jewish-only settlements in Gaza. Again, let's be clear. The intent of this ethnic cleansing is to remove any connection whatsoever of indigenous Palestinians from the land in Palestine. And the idea in the middle of a genocide that the Israeli ministers could have a celebratory party in Jerusalem calling for the resettlement illegally of Jewish-only settlements in Gaza is unbelievable. What did we hear from President Biden about this? What did we hear from Antony Blinken about this? Absolutely nothing. And you heard some, and this is a typical Israeli ploy, right, Jamal? You have some people saying, oh, that's not what the Israelis' intentions are, which is complete BS. But the reality is they're gearing up to put Gush Katif and other settlements back in Gaza, which is not only a complete violation of international law, which Israel is fond of doing, but it will extend the depopulation of Palestinians in Gaza even further. So I have a question for you, Jamal. Are you reading about this in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the LA Times? Are we reading about these kind of crazed ideas? I'm afraid that we're hearing more about UNRWA and 10 people who have been alleged to have been, were involved in the October 7th attacks, but we're not hearing anything about these kind of outrageous claims to resettle with illegal settlements in Gaza. It's really disturbing.
Well, it's this whole UNRWA thing is a major distraction, and it's a distraction about the ICJ ruling and the genocide, and it's really complicity in the starvation of the Palestinian people. So they're taking all measures, all steps, Jess, to really, that takes you back about the transfer. Population transfer is not a crazy idea. It's a real idea.
It's happening now.
This is the real idea, and it's not concocted by Israel alone. And this is something very important. There are politicians right here in the United States. You have Europeans who are thinking about this idea. The idea of it started before, but then it didn't work out, sending all the Palestinians into the Sinai under the guise it's temporary. And we know what temporary means. We heard that in 1948 and 1967 about the refugees, which is basically, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, the transfer of populations in and out of occupied territory is illegal. In other words, the transfer of Palestinians out of Palestine is illegal, and the transfer of Israeli settlers into Palestinian territories is illegal.
Yes.
And so the idea was to send them all to the Sinai Desert, and then some of the European countries and other countries will take few thousands in the United States, few thousands into Europe, and so forth. And the story. I mean, that was the plan, so that Israel
But it's still Jamal, it's still the plan.
Yeah, but then now they're trying to create different scenarios because the initial plan, and I assume it stands as such, that is Egypt and Sisi refused. They said, no way, we're not going to do that. I mean, they offered Egypt, and this is from trusted sources, just to wipe its entire IMF debt. Okay?
Right.
And they offered a whatever stipend or foreign aid, I don't know how many billions per year, just like they are giving Egypt because of the Camp David agreement in about $2 billion a year. And Egypt is in such a economical bad shape now.
Right.
The dollar is 60 Egyptian pounds.
Wow.
A year ago, it used to be 35 Egyptian pounds.
Wow.
5 years ago, it used to be about 10 to 12 Egyptian pounds.
Wow.
So this is how dire it is. And yet, Sisi refused. He said, we're not going to do that. And which is, I would say, kudos to him for spoiling that plan, even though they tried to blackmail and manipulate him, because, Egypt is at the verge of collapsing economically.
They did the same thing with the King of Jordan. They wanted to send more Palestinians to Jordan.
Yeah, well,
Jamal.
but the bulk was going to go into the Sinai Desert,
right?
And the rest, few thousands here and there, and then that's it. Wipe off basically the Gaza population off the map. So now the different things, and what I'm watching on TV, on Al Jazeera and others, I see these poor Palestinians in Gaza sitting on the rubble of their homes and saying, we're not moving, we're not going anywhere. They've killed my mother, they killed my father, I'm not going anywhere. And so they're finding out that's not going to work. They're also finding out that the people are fighting because also Israel, that's the other thing, is losing soldiers and getting thousands of them are injured, and many of them suffer from PTSD and so forth. So the question is, how long are they able to sustain this? And I'm seeing here the only way, because people are trying to say different solutions, in which we talk about, like the most recent now deal that they are working on, is to have another temporary ceasefire, it's not ceasefire, I guess, pause in fighting for 45 days, and Hamas would release first 25 of its hostages, and Israel will release 250, and so forth. I hope that this doesn't work out, and I know it's very difficult for Hamas because part of this 45 days, and I cannot speak on behalf of the people who are suffering and being starved to death to sustain themselves for another 45 days, because part of that's where the starvation is working, that Hamas is now might accept this because they need to feed the people.
Right.
But that's a nonsense, because then after 45 days, Israel will continue killing more Palestinians.
100%.
We know that. And then after 45 days, even before 45 days, Israel is supposed to release 250 prisoners. They'll arrest instead 500.
Exactly.
That's what they do. They release some prisoners here, and they go to the West Bank. They go, to Jenin and other places, and they arrest more Palestinians. Yesterday, disguised as Palestinian women and so forth, they went into a hospital and assassinated 3 patients in a hospital, Jess.
They impersonated doctors, Jamal, doctors and nurses.
Which is, again, I don't know, is that a violation of?
Yes.
Isn't that a war crime?
Yes.
Isn't that goes against any treaty that protects hospitals and doctors and medical staff?
Yes, and yes. We should move on to, we're obviously going to continue to report on this, Jamal, but it's not breaking news that nobody trusts Israel, and nobody trusts Israel's statements, and nobody trusts Israel as to engage in this kind of so-called prisoner swap and deal. But it may turn out, as you said, that Hamas does agree to limited ceasefire in order to just demand and insist that some food get in. But the idea that this is somehow going to lead to a permanent ceasefire, no one believes that. No Palestinian believes that. No person with any understanding of how war criminals act believes that that's going to lead to any kind of permanent understanding. And the other thing, before we go to our next story, Jamal, and we've been saying this for years and years and years, Benjamin Netanyahu continues to say he is not in support of a Palestinian state. He does not support a two-state solution. This is stuff we've been talking about for years and years and years, and people have laughed at us because they've said, well, of course Israel wants a two-state solution. That's the only way they're going to get peace. He has come out directly, Jamal, said he does not favor the creation of any Palestinian state. And, and of course you hear Biden and Blinken saying, oh, blah, 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 blah. He didn't really say that, but he did say it. And his ministers say it. And most of the Israeli population is saying it. So this fiction that we've been talking about forever here on Arab Talk, Jamal, that the two-state solution is dead and has been dead for a long time, seems to be confirmed by Benjamin Netanyahu and his own group.
Well, if you don't believe anything that Benjamin Netanyahu says, this is something you should believe.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving on to our next topic, Jess, Biden says paraphrasing, who cares about the Arab American vote? And then former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, says that the pro-Palestinian demonstrators are directed and funded by Vladimir Putin. I don't know, Jess, is the Democratic Party losing its compass? What's going on?
I think it's a little bit different, Jamal. I would say it's losing its compass. I think the delusion of a progressive liberal Democratic Party is finally falling away. And I know that I've been saying this for a long time. You've been saying this for a long time. But in reality, the Democratic Party, especially Nancy Pelosi and all of her deputies and lieutenants, have never been liberal or democratic. They've been selective. They continue to be selective. Biden doesn't care about Arab American voters. He doesn't care about black voters. And he doesn't care about, the bulk of the Democratic Party who are below age 50, I might add, the majority of whom are condemning Israel, the majority of whom want a ceasefire, the majority of whom who are saying to Biden, you're on the wrong side of history. But Biden has dug, M. Harris, by the way, and I'm going to get to Kamala Harris in a minute here, have dug themselves into a lose-lose situation. They are going to continue to support the war crimes and the genocide that are occurring in Gaza and in Palestine right now. And they're going to bet, their bet is, Jamal, that people will see Donald Trump as such a terrible human being that they're willing to take the bet that they can support genocide and still win the election.
That's what Biden is counting on, because he said that. He said that there is the former president want to deport Arabs and repeats that nonsense. That
it is nonsense, Jamal. And I just want to say again, I've made this prediction. You don't agree with me. I'm hoping you'll agree with me now. But Donald Trump is going to be our next president because of what Joe Biden is doing with Israel. And so when Donald Trump is president and takes office in 2025, and all the Democrats are up in arms about it, then you have only one person to blame. That's Joe Biden and his support for Israel.
Let me share some poll numbers, because you started talking about that. This is a poll conducted basically recently, which found that support for Biden's re-election has plummeted among Arab Americans, because he's like, who cares about Arab Americans? Dropping from almost 60%, 59% to 17%. I don't know who are this. I haven't met anyone of those 17%, frankly. They're not part of my circle, so I'd like to meet them and just give them a piece of my mind. A 42% decrease from 2020. And then this was a poll done 2 months ago. And then another one was released later on, I think it's in November or December, found that 2/3 of Arab and Muslim Democrats, now we're adding the Muslim factor, which is more numbers, in Michigan, your home state, Jess, said that they plan to vote against Biden. They don't care who they vote against Biden. While Muslims make up about 1% of probably the entire U.S. population, but many reside in key states, including Michigan.
Swing state,
Michigan.
Florida.
Which Biden won by just 150,000 votes in 2020. So there goes his 150,000 votes.
Right there, Jamal.
They're gonna evaporate, and that's why he's gonna lose. Now, I'm not as angry with Biden, Jess, because also, again, we should believe these politicians, just like I believe that Benjamin Netanyahu does not want to have a two-state. He's been saying that for years, on and off camera. Biden has been saying that he's just a Zionist for years. And so he's not going to take the side of Palestinians in any way, including when he sees them. In fact, he lied, and that's a big thing. He lied about the 40 beheaded babies, and then his spokespeople tried to walk back that. But then we have our representative right here in California, Nancy Pelosi, who represents the most progressive district probably in the entire United States, suggesting that the millions, we're not talking about 100 people, all these demonstrations happening globally, and millions, all these demonstrations happening in the United States now.
Millions,
you throw the word millions, who have been demonstrating for what? A ceasefire, a meager ceasefire. They're not asking anything else. They're not asking, give missiles to the Palestinians to defend themselves. They're not asking for anything else, just a ceasefire to protect the lives of children and women and the innocent. And then she goes around calling them basically agents of Putin. It's crazy. I'm so angry. Just like all these young students in their teens and then in their 20s, she's vilifying them and labeling them as agents of Putin, Russian agents. Reminds me of the McCarthy era, where you didn't like some guy, an actor, or someone from the LGBTQ community, and you labeled them as commies. So basically, she's saying they are commies, they are traitors to this country. How do we let something like this go? How does she get away with something like this, to label them without evidence? And then on top of this, she's saying, I want the FBI to investigate them. I want, as someone said it, I think Medea Benjamin, I want Nancy Pelosi investigated for getting money from AIPAC and for her trading, that was talked about before. I mean, you want to investigate students on college campuses. You want to investigate members of the Jewish Voice for Peace for basically demonstrating and asking for a ceasefire, by calling them that they are agents of basically Russia.
You know what, Jamal? You know what this says is how desperate Nancy Pelosi is, because she is a shill. Nancy Pelosi is a shill for AIPAC and a shill for the government of Israel. We've been saying that for a long time. People get very angry when we call out Nancy Pelosi because she's a Democrat. She's supposed to be progressive. She's supposed to be liberal. And what we've been saying for years and years and years is look at her voting record when it comes to illegal colonial settlements in Palestine. Look at her voting record when it comes to money that is going to fund war crimes and genocide in Palestine. And now, as I like to say, the kind of patina, the kind of covering, if you will, of Nancy Pelosi as a liberal Democrat is completely shattered. She is taking the seat next to Benjamin Netanyahu, Jamal, just as we're speaking now. She's taking her seat at on the stage with all the leaders of AIPAC, from whom she and her lieutenants have received enormous support. And now AIPAC and pro-Israel supporters, Jamal, are putting pressure on Nancy Pelosi, putting pressure on her to kind of, up her game. And the statement is not just crazy. It's not just bizarre. It's frankly irresponsible to call for the FBI to investigate people. As you say, Jamal, the only thing people are demanding is stop slaughtering civilians. Let's have a ceasefire. To have the moral courage as a teenager, as a young adult, as an 80-year-old, whatever your age is, and to be called out for demanding the moral clarity of not killing babies, not killing innocent civilians, and being labeled a Putin or a communist, supporter is just dangerous, and it's just bizarre, Jamal. And
I think it goes beyond any political standards. I mean, I understand members of Congress, the majority of Congress supports Israel. Majority of Congress buries their heads in the sand. Members of Congress bury their heads in the sand when it comes to Palestinian death and Palestinian children getting killed. Right. But to vilify millions of people for basically exercising their First Amendment and demonstrating in the streets, and she's not any regular member of Congress. She was the Speaker of the House for so many years, the first woman Speaker of the House for so many years, from a very progressive district, the San Francisco Bay Area, to say something like this and get away with it.
Irresponsible.
You know what? I compare this to the lawsuit that was brought against Donald Trump for accusing these two ladies during the elections for whatever, stuffing ballots and so forth, and they won the lawsuit,
the defamation lawsuit,
and the same thing, the defamation that idiot Giuliani made against the what's that name, the company, and also now he's going to be bankrupt
Right.
because of making that. This is defamation because she's saying that they are basically foreign agents. I think that there should be a class action lawsuit brought by all these people who have been demonstrating and expressing their opinion against her for accusing them of being foreign agents. Basically, she's accusing them of treason. If you're doing the work of Putin in this country, you are a traitor, and you should be labeled as such if you were. But since she's making this up, there should be an investigation. Yes, the FBI should investigate her claims about this, and then she should be brought. Basically, there should be a class action lawsuit against her for defaming young students, members of Jewish Voice for Peace who I've been seeing, seniors, all kinds of community members, basically. You can't label these people. They are old, they are young, they are black, they are white, they are, Latinos and Latinas and so forth, that she's saying that they are basically doing the work of Putin in this country, and some of them are directly connected to funding, like receiving money.
I mean, Jamal, here's what I want to say to the world and to people in the United States. When Donald Trump is your next president, you need to thank Nancy Pelosi, you need to thank Joe Biden, you need to thank Anthony Blinken, and all the people who buried their head in the sand while a genocide was occurring in Palestine. You can thank the Democrats and nobody else that Donald Trump is going to be our next president.
I think I agree with you 100%. They are basically destroying the Democratic Party, her likes. And, by the way, yesterday I watched an interview by the mayor in Michigan, and he said how Arab Americans declined to meet with Biden's campaign manager.
Right.
And I listened to the interview, and the mayor said, no, I'm not going to vote. We're not going to vote for Biden. But guess what? We also have another election, which is a Senate election, and we're also not going to vote for a Democrat.
Right.
In our district.
Yes.
I mean, imagine.
Yes.
So maybe you should take your prediction farther than this, is that you're going to have the presidency in the hand of the Republicans, and assuming this is Donald Trump, you're going to have both houses in the hands of the Republicans. That's what's going to happen.
I agree,
That's
Jamal.
because of their stupidity.
And they should pay. And I know people get alarmed when I say this, Jamal, but Democrats like Pelosi, like Biden, like Blinken, like the Senate, like the Congress have to pay a price. Hakeem Jeffries has to pay a price. They all have to pay a price for their complicity in this genocide that's occurring right now. And I know that's maybe pretty harsh words and pretty hard words for people to say, but people who actually believe in a ceasefire, who actually believe in morality, who actually believe in international law are being let down, not by the Republicans, Jamal, but by the Democrats, and they need to be called out. I'll just end by saying that Kamala Harris had the audacity to come to the Bay Area yesterday, clamoring for reproductive rights, talking about how reproductive rights are on the line if Donald Trump, or the Republicans win the presidency. The audacity of her to say that while she's turning her head away from the 50,000 Palestinian women who are pregnant right now and being denied access to maternal and child care, who are dying in childbirth, the children who are dying from the genocide that's occurring right now. It was outrageous, and there was a huge protest calling her out. So Democrats, you need to look in the mirror because you're the ones that are bringing Donald Trump back to the United States.
And this is what's happening, Jess. Every time Biden opens his mouth, Kamala Harris opens her mouth, you have someone amongst the audience who says something about the ceasefire
every time
and about their connection to that genocide that's going on, and they're going to be reminded for the next 10 months prior to the election, and if this is what they want, and maybe Nancy Pelosi want to accuse all these people being Russian agents who are interrupting her speech also in Seattle and interrupting Kamala Harris's speech just like within the past 24 hours and others. She wants to accuse them of being Russian agents.
Well, Everybody should thank Nancy Pelosi for Donald Trump. That's all I got to say.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll speak to you next week.
See you next week.